Welcome to the Big Apple Film Festival Distribution Summit. I'm your host, Lavinder Gill, and super excited to have writer, producer, director Trace Slobotkin with us. Trace, can you tell us a little bit about your background, please?
Sure. I went to University of Southern California Film School, graduated from there, and started writing to get into directing. Started writing feature films, wrote a couple screenplays, directed one very low budget movie, and got into screenwriting, wrote a bunch of screenplays, like I said, and then I got sort of involved I had a friend who was a producer in reality TV, and I wrote a lot in that space, writing host copy, helping flesh out shows. I started on a show called For Love or Money, and then worked on Biggest Loser, the first couple seasons of Biggest Loser, wrote the host stuff for that, helped develop the show, did shows like Beauty and the Geek and Tool Academy and all sorts of crazy fun reality shows. And then over the course of the years, I've just sort of done everything in that kind of space. I've done hidden camera shows. I worked on pop-up video when they brought that back. I've done crime shows, I've done supernatural shows, I've sort of written in everything in that genre, and I still write, I still work on TV pilots, and I still write features, and I produce, and all that fun stuff. So you got to do a little bit of everything these days.
You do. It just goes to show you that there isn't kind of one pathway. And
True.
So I guess in your origin story, let's go back to you making your first film, because I think that's where a lot of our attendees are. You know I recently directed an independent film that wasn't made for a ton of money. And how did that process start? And how did you fund it? And what happened with it to get you to that next step?
Sure. It was actually a pretty interesting a little road. I'll try and keep the story as short as possible. When I graduated from film school, while I was in film school, I interned for this producer, Arnold Kopelson, who at the time was a very big Hollywood producer. He had done The Fugitive and a whole bunch of movies like that, big action movies. And I was the story editor there, which involved reading a lot of scripts and recommending scripts, and was just miserable reading. You work all day long, you're reading everybody else's material, you're getting scripts from the best agencies and that are just awful. Like you're just like, this is awful, this person's represented at this. And so I was just antsy, like I gotta go do my own thing. So I left there and I started writing because I wanted to direct something for me to direct. And I wrote this script that you could no longer make. It was called Serial Killing for Dummies, and it was about a kid that wanted to be famous but had no talent and decided to become a serial killer because they become famous. There's a lot more to it, but at the time it was a little bit. There was a lot of serial killer stuff back in those days, and a teenager wanting to become a serial killer these days, you could not make that movie. It's not politically correct nor appropriate, but it was a dark comedy that was, ultimately he's a good kid and can't bring himself to kill anybody, and it turns out there's a real killer, and he, because of his knowledge, he finds that guy. And so I wrote this script not even knowing it was my first screenplay. I had gone to film school, but I had never written a full-length feature, and I just sort of started writing. And the idea being that maybe some friends from film school, we would go shoot it ourselves. I didn't know if it would be a short. I didn't know what it was. I sort of just wrote the first draft, and it was about 50 to 60 pages. And I showed it to my friends from film school and said, can we go shoot this? What should we do? And they liked it. And they said, you should make this into a feature, like write another 30 pages, flesh it out a little bit more, and see what you can do with it. So I did that. I had a lot of friends that were writers that sort of, helped me with that first one and gave me notes. And I got it, to be a feature. And I had a friend who was represented at an agency, and he passed it along to them. And it took like 2 months, a month or two for the agent to even call me back, and I had thought nothing's going to happen with this. But then the agent called and said, I like this. I want to send it out as a writing sample. Sort of sent it out. I got a bunch of meetings, but nothing, he didn't really push it as a spec or for sale. It was just kind of like, here's a writer. And I was doing meetings, but nothing was happening with it. And so I was kind of at the point where I was just like, I have to go make this. So I called those same friends from film school. They were cinematographers and camera operators that had done a bunch of stuff. And so I called them. I was like, let's get together and just talk about like how we can make this low budget, what we can do. And I think it was like a Monday that we were going to get together that night. And like a day before, I got a call from this guy who said, hey, I read your script and I want to talk to you about it. It was a completely random cold call. And I met this guy at a coffee place, and he basically said, we want to make your movie. It was a very lucky kind of coincidence. What I later found out was that my script, when the agent had sent out my script, it goes to all these different agents and producers, and an assistant read it and liked it. And this producer was working with these other producers who wanted to do low budget films. They had one of the producers owned an actual studio location, sound stages. And so they were looking for low budget films. And this producer said to this assistant, is there anything good that you've read recently that hasn't sold? And the assistant gave him my script. He liked it. He called me. They said, we want to make your movie. I said, I want to direct. They were not so keen on that at first because I had no experience. I just had a film school short. And so luckily, this agent that hip pocketed me at the time, which hip pocketed, for anybody that doesn't know, they don't officially sign you on. It's sort of like a trial run. They're like, we'll represent you, and see if we can get anything going.
Right.
And the agent sort of convinced them, give them a chance to direct. We'll package it. We'll put some stars in it. And it all moved really quickly. They were like, okay, let's get this made. We want to get it done quickly. And so like within a few months, I was directing. I think the budget was like, this was a while back, but the budget was like $450,000, I think. And we had maybe 18 days, something like that, to shoot it. And I was 24 at the time, and I had never directed a feature. This was the first script I wrote. And it was moving so quickly. They were in such a rush to get it done. They wanted to sell it at, I think MeFed was a conference that they wanted to get it done by that time. And so I didn't even have a lot of time to really I wanted to be very particular about the details. There's a lot of things that I wasn't able to focus on. When I go back and watch the movie now, there's so many things that I'm like, I wish I had more time. I don't like that actor wearing that color in front of that set. Shouldn't have been this color and that color and things like that. But it was just like, I have to get this done. We're going into production. And it was, I will never forget. There's a few things from that I will never forget. First was the casting, when we were bringing in actors to read for the final round, when we sort of narrowed it down and they were bringing actors in. And I remember we had gone out to breakfast, and at the time I did not drink that much coffee, but I was like kind of nervous, and I drank a lot of coffee. And so I was jittery when we went into this thing. And these actors came in and were auditioning, reading something that I had written in my apartment at 3 a.m, and it was really a cool experience. Like, wow, this is real. Yeah. So I never forget that, also because I felt like I was going to have a heart attack from the nerves and all the coffee. And then the first day of shooting, I walked onto the set. The AD brought me on, and I was like younger than all the crew, and I look very young too. I looked like a little kid, and they brought me on, and I remember like everyone staring at me, and I was so nervous. And I didn't really, I knew what to do. I had directed and gone to film school, but never in this capacity. Yeah. And so the AD's like, all right, what are we doing? And I was like, we'll put the camera here and the actors over there. And I kind of looked around and no one kind of said anything, and the AD was like, all right, sounds good. Let's get it moving. And I was like, did I do that right? He's like, yeah, you're great. And I sort of I quickly got comfortable with it. It was something that I'd always wanted to do. And just sort of went with it. It helped that I wrote the script because I had been with this script for a while. So I knew the material and I was able to really answer questions for the talent. And it was great. And we shot it. It was a rush. We did the best we could. And then, as often happens with independent things that are low budget, money got caught up, and one of the producers stole money from the budget to pay his alimony or something like that. And the movie sat around for a while, and I didn't have any of the elements. I couldn't even use any of my resources to finish it because I didn't have them. And so they finally ended up finishing it without me. And then they sent it to me, and there were so many like filmmaking 101 mistakes that drove me crazy. And but I finally sat down with the producer, and I gave them some notes to change some stuff, and it went straight to video. And I think Lionsgate released it, and that was it. That was my first film, and it, eventually it came out and went straight to video.
Hey man, you got it done. You got it out.
The experience. Thank you. Yeah.
24 years old. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was probably 33 the first time I directed a feature. So yeah, you're 9 years ahead of the game. But okay, so you have a feature that's out. Where do you go from there? How do you move forward?
So the problem because the movie, I want to say it took like 5 years between when we shot it and when it came out, I think, at least. And I had this rough cut of it, but I mean, like I said, this was a while ago. So this was like, I had a rough cut, like a VHS copy of the rough cut. And the rough cut wasn't good enough to show people. Like, I felt like it needed more work. So I couldn't really show my work to anybody and get more directing jobs. So I just went back to writing. And I also, at the time, felt like, okay, it's eventually going to get done, and then I'll use it as a calling card and show, my work. And then, so I just went back to writing scripts and sold a few things here and there, and was just working as a screenwriter. And then when the movie finally came out, like the way they finished it, I didn't love it. So I didn't really show it to that many people because there was, like I said, there were so many mistakes that they made that, like the opening title sequence, there's dialogue, and underneath the dialogue, there's music with lyrics, with vocals under it. So it's hard to, and it's like, no, you don't do that. But the producers had done this, and it was out of my control at that point. So I just went to screenwriting, and then through that got the reality stuff. And then the next thing I knew, it kind of, that's where I was. I was writing all the time. And so I never really used the directing. And so it never was the springboard that I was hoping it would be.
Right. Yeah. It's tough out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's fast forward to now. Are you still working primarily in TV and in reality, or are you focused in other areas? What are you working on these days?
I have been starting to branch out into some more scripted, and I have a couple things that are in the hopper now that I'm working on. But yeah, I'm still doing a lot of that. The past few years, there's been a big resurgence. I call it reality, but it's really not, because it's a lot of writing. This past year, I worked on a show called Unexplained. That's, it's William Shatner hosted. It's one of those shows where they talk about, like Sacred Bones was one, or Demonic Encounters. You see them on Discovery Channel and History Channel, where it's people talking about, weird, the Sacred Bones one was like weird rituals around the world. And then I just finished recently working on History's Greatest Mysteries, which is, I wrote an episode about the Loch Ness Monster and all the theories behind that. And I just finished one on the Bermuda Triangle and scientific theories behind that. Those shows are considered reality, but the producers give you a treatment and say, you're going to do the Bermuda Triangle. Here's what the Bermuda Triangle is. Here's 7 theories on what scientists think could be happening. And then we write a script, like the writers, for all these episodes, we write everything. We write what we would like to hear the experts say, so, it is a lot of writing, even though they call it reality TV.
Right. Sounds like there's a lot of research in it too, almost like.
Oh yeah. Yeah, lots of research. And depending on the show, it's different. Sometimes, like earlier this year, I did some work on crime shows, and those shows, it's a little different kind of writing where they will do their interviews first, and then they give you all that information. You just get a long transcript of all the stuff the lead investigator said, all the stuff that the victim's parents said. And you're telling that story by cutting, taking those beats out of those interviews and sort of telling the story by putting that all together and then tying it all together and writing narration. For these other shows, it was, we wrote everything before they did the interviews. So, there's it's a lot of writing, but each show requires a different kind of writing.
Okay. This is an off-topic question, but I keep getting distracted. Is that a Necronomicon right behind you?
That is a Necronomicon right behind me. This was a kind of new purchase, and I thought I'm gonna stick it up here because I like it. Yeah, it's my Evil Dead 2 is my favorite horror movie, and
no, it's fantastic. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's an Necronomicon.
Yeah. I have a lot of my 2 main sort of things that I do are horror and comedy.
Okay.
And that movie that I wrote originally was a horror comedy. I sort of combined the 2. So I have a huge love of both horror movies and comedy.
I was just at the American Film Market and I pitched a horror comedy to one of the distributors, and they're like, "Oh, you can't sell that." They were just like not even remotely interested. I'm like, "What about this movie and this movie and this movie?" And then, they're just, all right. Then I pitched it somewhere else and they loved it. So we'll see what happens with that.
Well, good luck with that. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate
those are my favorite. Horror comedies are always my favorite.
Okay. Well, for those of us that would love to kind of emulate that kind of career, how do you get into writing for TV, and what's the market out there for writers and directors?
I from what I've seen, I think it's a good time now to be a writer. There's so many places that need content.
Mhm.
And so it's a great time. There's so many ways to kind of go about it, but the great thing that with the way things are today is that because there's so many people producing things, not just on TV, but on the internet, it's a lot easier to find writing jobs. There's websites, there's one, Staff Me Up, that I use a lot. That's a great website that, if you're looking for work in the sort of reality space, it's mostly that kind of stuff, but there's other types of jobs. They post writer jobs, story producer jobs, and it's a good, I think you could probably get your foot in the door that way. So, there's another one, I think Mandy, there's a website called Mandy that has like crew level positions that you can find. And just, sort of applying for jobs in those space. I've seen stuff on Staff Me Up a lot of times that's very entry level writing kind of stuff. And another thing I think that would be important to do is just to if you haven't done that much stuff, just write samples of every kind of thing, because like I said, I found that there's so much content out there, whether it's crime shows and you know, these mysteries kind of things that I've done, and hosted reality stuff, or just housewives shows that they're looking for people. You know, there's so much different kind of writing to be able to have that versatility, to be able to say, you know, I can do this. A lot of times they'll say, well, looking for someone, you know, it's a cooking show, we're looking for writers to write for this cooking show or a real estate show, and you have to have cooking experience, you know, experience in cooking. So sometimes they'll do it, but a lot of times I think they're willing to, especially in this space, in the reality space, give people an opportunity, you know, if they don't have that experience. So just having some samples to show that you can write different kinds of things, I think is important. And just, you know, from what I've seen, there's a huge push to get different kinds of people with different experiences. And so it's a good time for diversity and you know, and for everybody to kind of, they want to hear new voices and different voices. And so it's just a matter of, you know, keeping at it and applying for jobs, and there's eventually, if you keep at it long enough, I think, you know, you'll get your foot in that door.
No, that's awesome. Thank you for listing those sites out. Now, you've written for some of the biggest streamers out there, for Amazon, for Apple, for Netflix, I'm sorry, Hulu, Apple. And
Hulu.
what's the difference between writing for these different streamers? Is it all the same, or is there different requirements?
You know, it's a good question. When I work on a project, usually my interactions are mostly with the production companies, because usually there's a production company that does that produces the show for the streamers. So they're the ones hiring me. So I'm working closely with the producers that are working for the production company more so than the streamers. But depending on the show, you know, I will have some interaction with the streamers, but not as much. But from my experience, I mean, at the end of the day, they're all just network executives. It just like, you know, the people at Netflix and Hulu, or just like people at ABC or NBC, they're all network executives, and some of them are great and have great ideas and are really collaborative and creative, and some of them give you the worst notes, and you're like, oh my God, this is awful, or they don't know what they want, or whatever. I did the show Haunted with Netflix, and they were good. They were very, we would just pitch them the stories and they would give us notes. Most recently, I did this drag queen Halloween variety show for Hulu. It was the Halloween drag extravaganza, which I think is still available on Hulu. So go check that out. It's a musical that we did. And the executive from Hulu was very hands-on, but he was great. It was his vision to do this show, and he really had an idea of what he wanted. And so he was very hands-on, but like in the best way possible. He was open to our creative input, but really knew, no, that's not what this show is, or yes, that's what it is. So I really enjoyed working with Hulu. I found them to be really fun to work with and creative. And but at the end of the day, you know, it's the streamers and the networks. I mean, they have different goals and what their audiences, or what they think their audiences want. So that sort of changes, you know, what you're doing or what they're looking for. But at the end of the day, they're all network executives, and some of them are great, some of them are okay.
A reminder to our attendees, put any questions that you have into our Q&A box. All right. It says that you've also produced for these streamers. How did you get into producing, and what does that entail versus writing? Because it seems like on the TV shows, they're not that far apart.
Yeah, well, so I mean, mainly sometimes when I was writing, because reality doesn't like to say they have writers, they'll call you a story producer sometimes. So initially, when I first was credited as a producer, a lot of it was like, I'm a consulting producer. What does that mean? I'm a writer. It's reality. They don't want to say there's a writer. And so they call you a producer. But about 5 or 6 years ago, when I did the Netflix show Haunted, there was the co-executive producer was somebody that I had worked with in the past, and he called me and said, hey, we're doing this show. It's about people that have had supernatural experiences, and we're going to interview them and then recreate their experience and turn it into a horror movie. And I know that you love horror and you'd be great as a writer, but I need a producer because they're also going to have to do the interviews with these people, call them on the phone, do an interview. You're going to have to, work on their travel and tell them what the wardrobe is and get them the set and do all that stuff. And, I know you don't have that experience. Is there anyone you know? And I said, oh, I have that experience. I've done that, which was not true. But I had been around reality shows and been on enough sets that I knew how to do. Like, I felt like confident that I know how to do this. So it was one of those fake it till you make it kind of things where I was like, yeah, I can do this. And it really wasn't that tough. I did feel like I had been around enough to kind of know how to do interviews and have that experience. It was hard when you're doing both writing and producing. I did find it tough to kind of switch gears, especially when we're really in the thick of things in pre-production of having like, okay, I'm writing these scripts and then I have to take a break and make phone calls and make sure, hey, you can't wear logos on your shirt when you fly in to do your interview and stuff, like juggling, going back and forth between left brain, right brain, was hard. I like to focus on one thing if I'm being creative and writing, doing that. But that was the show that I story produced for that because it involved both and got that experience. And then from that point on, just was able to say I was a producer and was able to produce other shows. My experience over the past years since then, especially now, because of COVID, most of the story producing type of stuff that I do, it's mostly involves writing. They're really looking for writers, and the producing part is really just mostly doing interviews, or coordinating certain things. But that, I feel like as a storyteller, interviews, I mean, for me personally, and I think a lot of writers, it comes naturally because when you're interviewing these people, you're trying to find the story. So that kind of producing, I found it to be very, it was a natural extension to go into. But I know that, a lot of people, you can kind of, if you're interested in producing, it's easy, not easy, but you can really work your way up in that reality world. It's a good place to start because they're willing to give people a shot doing some of the lower level producing jobs. And then, and you get more experience and they'll say, okay, you can be, you're a supervising producer and then you could be a segment producer and you can kind of work your way up in that world. It's a little bit easier way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, I used to, many moons ago, work in the TV world, and I was an associate producer, which meant I wrote the news. But they don't want you to think anyone's writing the news, but obviously they're reading something that's been written. So
Right.
it's the exact same thing. I didn't realize that's exactly how it was. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that when you went to film school, they didn't teach writing for reality shows. Is that
No.
so to say?
I believe they do now. I
They do
think
now.
I know that there's a reality class at USC.
Right.
Um,
So how did your skill set translate? How hard was that transition to go from feature writing and then try to translate that over to writing for reality? Is it the same thing or is it completely different?
it's different, but it was a while ago when I started, but and I could be wrong in my memory of this, but I didn't find it that difficult, only because at the time I was such a fan of some of those reality shows. So when I started, it was when Survivor, had been on for a few seasons and was really a popular show. And there was a couple others. I don't know if The Mole or Big Brother. Some of those shows have been out, and Survivor specifically, I remember those first few seasons. I was a really big fan and watched it a lot. And the first show that I started writing on was this. It was a sort of a kids version of Survivor. It was called Endurance. It was on NBC on Saturday mornings. And when the host, who was also the producer, was someone that I had known my whole life. He grew up down the street from me, and we had stayed in touch when I was in LA. And he called me and said, he would call me throughout the years and, hey, I need someone to edit something together really quick, or I need someone to go shoot. They did a Mad Libs kids game show about Mad Libs. And when I was in college, he said, I need someone to go around to kids' homes and shoot them reading their Mad Libs. You have a camera, can you go shoot? I would do little jobs like that for him. And he was doing this Kid Survivor, and he called me and said, this writer's been doing this stuff for me, but I don't feel like he's got the tone right. We grew up in the same place, my voice, you've seen me, like, can you want to take a crack at it? And so between that of sort of feeling like I knew him and how he speaks, and just sort of when I first wrote that first show, I just sort of imagined, how would Jeff Probst deliver this on Survivor? And I was such a big fan of it. It came pretty naturally to me. Like, well, how would they do this? That guy's name was JD Roth. JD was also very, hands-on and helpful, and taught me a lot about what he knew from hosting and reality. So it was I don't feel like I had that tough of a transition. It was because I had watched so much stuff. I kind of knew, generally, okay, this is how it should be. And the other thing that I started doing when I first got started, which is almost impossible to do now, is I was trying to watch everything that was out there. I tried to watch at least one episode of every reality show, or at least have knowledge of that, so that when I did work on a show and they were like, okay, we're going to do this kind of game, this challenge that they're going to have to do, or we need to have them, get on the scale, and how are we going to reveal their weights, whatever. I had seen enough shows to say, this show does it this way. What if we do it like this instead? Or, one time they revealed a challenge, on this show this way, and they saved this for the end. Let's try that. So I knew what was out there that helped to say, let's not do it this way, or this was successful on this show, let's try this, which I think was a really helpful thing. So I think anybody that wants to get into this, just having a general knowledge of these shows and how they work is a really helpful thing.
Okay. And I know when you're working with a network and they have commercials in them, there's very stringent requirements in terms of how long something can be and what has to happen at a certain time. Do the streamers require any kind of certain stuff for these kinds of show, or is it kind of wide open?
It's pretty wide open. When I did that Hulu, the variety show that I did for Hulu, we wrote it with commercials, with commercial breaks in it, for those people that don't pay the Hulu subscription. They would see the commercial. So we wrote 2 commercial breaks, but it wasn't as strict as like the networks are when you're writing a sitcom or something like that. We didn't have to, like, it has to be this many pages and hit this time frame. It was a little bit more free form in that, we didn't have to be so stringent on those marks.
Okay.
And for the other shows, like the show I did for Netflix, there was no guidelines. It was initially, I think we were writing an hour-long show, and it was just like, keep it around 40-ish so minutes, but we're a streamer, you can take as long as you want, kind of thing. And then in the edit, I think they ended up making most of the episodes were like 30 minutes.
Okay.
So there were no really guidelines for that.
Okay. And now with this big push towards what Hulu is doing and AVOD, are there opportunities on those other channels like Freevee and Tubi and all the other there was one, I interviewed someone earlier today. Let me see, what is Film Rise, different streamers like that. Have you had any experience working with them, and what kind of requirements they need, because they do commercials and all their stuff?
Yeah, I haven't had any experience with any of those, and I'm trying to think if I nobody that I know has worked with any of those, so I don't know much about those. But I know that there is so many, platforms out there that need content. It's a great time. I don't know how much longer it's going to last. I got a little worried when those Netflix earnings came out like 6 months ago or something, and everyone got worried. I was like, oh, is this the bubble? Because it seems like there's so many companies out there now that it seems like at some point they're going to consolidate, and some of these are going to go away. Hopefully not that soon, but for now, there's just so many platforms out there, and you've got the big ones, and then the other ones, like you said, that it's a great time to just get your content out there, get your scripts out there, because they need content.
Okay. Now, while you've been doing all this, you've continued to write features. Is that correct?
Yes,
So,
for the most part, yes. Sometimes I get too busy, but yep, I still try and write features, and I've been working on some TV pilots too.
okay. And I know you've sold a bunch of these features. Are you going to be directing a feature anytime soon, or are you just focusing on writing? What's your plan for the future?
I have a feature that I'm working on that I will potentially direct if it comes about. I mean, that is my goal. I mean, that's a lot of people will say that, to get back in the directing chair. I've been doing some music videos lately to kind of get back into that mode. I was working on another independent feature that I was supposed to direct, and then that whole thing fell apart, which often happens. That's the other thing too, that I feel like, people shouldn't let that discourage them, that I'm sure it's such a long road. That's one of the things that when you're getting a movie made, like the film that I directed, it was super low budget, like you said, it got done, and people in the industry, it's hard when you make something and it's not what you want it to be. Like, I wrote the movie Kicking It Old School that Jamie Kennedy starred in, and I didn't direct it. I wasn't, they bought the script and went off and made the movie, and it was not the movie I would have made. I was, and so you go, yeah, it's hard to say, hey, my movie's coming out, when you don't think it's good. You don't want people to think, oh, does he think that that's a good movie?
Right.
So, but at the same time, you don't want to be ungrateful. It is a huge accomplishment that you had a movie get made. So it's a weird thing to kind of say, like, yeah, I'm really grateful. It's really awesome to get a movie made, but it's not so good. And so many things don't get made. And this other project, I had these producers came to me, and they were independent producers, and they were going to get the money, and they were going to get investors. And so it dragged along for years, and I was going to direct it, and then it just sort of fell apart. But I have another thing now that I've been working on. I moved back home a couple of years ago to work, to give it a shot working at my parents' business. And my friends thought it was that I should write that as a movie. The idea of me working at this business was funny. So I'm currently writing that script, and hopefully would direct it if it came about, for sure.
Yeah, where's home?
Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Oh, is that
Suburbs.
where you are right now?
That's what?
Is that where you are right now?
No, I'm back in Los Angeles now. 2 years in the suburbs of Jersey. It's right outside of Philadelphia. For those of you who don't know, was enough for me. I grew, when I moved out here to LA, I love Los Angeles. For all the bad things people say about it, I've always loved it out here, and I missed it too much out here to not be here.
Well, I live in Collegeville, Pennsylvania, which is just north of King of Prussia.
Oh,
So
nice.
like
You're
maybe
about an hour
Yeah.
or so away from where I was.
Cherry Hill, probably not even that far, probably 40 minutes on a good
Yeah,
day.
40 minutes. I took a few trips up to the King of Prussia Mall, for sure.
So here's to the tri-state area.
Exactly. Yeah.
But so you said when you were producing and writing, you had left brain, right brain stuff going on. Do you have the same thing going back and forth between reality and feature writing?
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things that I've always struggled with is when especially years ago when I first started working in reality, the idea was always, okay, I got a job and I'm going to work in this reality show, but this isn't really what I want to do. I want to be a feature writer. I want to be a feature director. And so I would always go into it saying, okay, I'm going to work on this show during the day, and then at night I'm going to come home and write my scripts. And in theory, it's a great theory, but a lot of times you finish the day and your brain is just fried. It's just hard to switch gears. At least I found it that way. I know there's a lot of people that do it, and a lot of people that just have 9 to 5 office jobs and come home and work on their scripts. And I'm always in awe of people that can do it. I've always had trouble doing that. I've tried to get better with it over the years and try and be able to switch those brains, but I do kind of struggle with it, and I'm better off usually, okay, I'm going to work on the weekends. Or the one thing that I do like about reality and just all sort of film jobs is that you're not committing to, I'm going to work at this job in this office for whoever knows how long, okay, I'm going to work on this show and it's a 2-month job. Or they're usually a finite short amount of time, and sometimes the job is you have to get your work done, and then you might have a day where if you finished your writing in time, you don't have anything to do, and so you can focus on all your stuff, which I found is helpful. But I'm still not great at it. That script that I just mentioned about me going back home, I was hoping to finish that a couple months ago, and then I got a couple jobs. And the producer that I'm writing the script for, that's interested in it, I said, look, I got this job. I got to take this job. It's a great show. I want to work on it. So I'm going to need some more time, because I couldn't juggle both. It was too hard for me to do.
Yeah, I had a situation a little over a month ago where a producer called me up. And mind you, I hadn't written a feature in a few years because I'm busy with the other parts of my life. I'm a husband and a parent and a business owner and all this stuff. And they were already set and scheduled and funded to make it. And they'd had 2 people write the script and they weren't happy. He goes, there's only one thing. I need it in a week. And having not written a feature in so long, and having just bought another business and being there 12 hours a day, I somehow knocked out a feature in a week. And they actually
Wow.
wrapped filming last night, I think, or day before yesterday. Shot it like that quick. But it's weird how that happens, because it's hard. Because I know
Yeah.
when I used to run a film program, for those 3 years, I didn't write anything, because I gave my creative juju to the classes and the students. And it sounds like you were doing that to the reality shows. And so there's none left,
Yeah.
to put in your own stuff. So there's definitely a bit of a struggle with that.
100%. But there's what you're saying about writing quickly. I've found that is a really important skill to have, and one that I've always struggled with. I'm the kind of writer that's like, I'll get stuck on a line and I'll be like, I gotta figure this out, and I'll waste tons of time on this line. And the friends I have out here that are the most successful writers, they just power through it, and they will just write. My friend Danny Strong, who created Dope Sick, and he's a bunch of whole other things. He does a vomit draft, and he just sits down and he writes, and he outlines, he spends time outlining, so he knows the story, but he just writes. And even if he finds, okay, well, this is a problem, he just powers through it, because he knows once it's down on the page, it's so much easier to rewrite and to see the story and figure out things. And so that's something I've always struggled with and I've tried to get better at. And these last couple jobs that I've had, they kind of overlapped a little bit. So there was days when I was jumping from one to the next. They were both in that sort of reality vein, but I've been getting better at just gotta focus, and you just, write and you train your brain. And I have another friend, Alex Litvack, who's also a great writer, who once equated writing to kind of going to the gym, and the more you do it and sit down, you got to do it. You got to, every day you got to go and you got to work out. You got to sit down and write. And the more you do that, the better shape you'll be in, and you'll sort of work that muscle, and it makes it easier to sit down and just write, which is what you need to do.
One of the things that helped me kind of break through that perfectionism that I had as a younger writer is a wonderful book by Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird. Have you ever read that book?
No, I'll have to read it.
Not on screenwriting, it's just kind of on writing in general. And the name of one of the chapters was Writing Shitty First Drafts.
Right.
And she said the goal of writing a first draft is to write a shitty first draft.
Yeah.
That's it. And if you can take that pressure off yourself to have it be perfect, and just like my specialty is writing shitty first drafts. I do that all day long. And so I don't know why, but somehow it just kind of clicked in my brain. And so I have that kind of mentality to just push through. I just wish I did it more often.
Yeah.
I'm jealous that you get to write all the time, and that's an exciting thing to make your living that way.
Thank you. But yeah, that is an important thing, because then you've accomplished something that there's so many writers that just never finish. You'll hear a lot of writing people, educators will say, just finish something, because so many people try and write something and don't finish. So that's important.
All right. Well, our cutoff time is in about 3 minutes here. So I just want to know, is there anything you want to leave our attendees with? Any thoughts, any encouragement that you want to give them just to push through?
I mean, just go out there and do it. I've always, the advice that I've always said to people, especially like younger people starting out, is that if there's something else you'd be happy doing, go do that, because this business is tough. You're going to get rejection. No matter how good you are, you're gonna feel rejection, and you're gonna get knocked down, and it's gonna happen numerous times. And the best, if you don't have any other options, if this is your one thing and there's nothing else in life I want to do but this, you have no choice but to pick yourself up and keep going. And from my experience, of the people that I know that have been successful, they just keep at it and keep at it, and because there's nothing else they'd be happy doing, and eventually it'll happen. It'll come to you.
All right. Well, Trace, thank you so much for taking the time, for being so candid, and sharing all your insight and experiences. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our attendees have as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.